It's the Sean Widmer Podcast. It's a journal by someone that just really doesn't like to write.
Well, hello there. Thanks for tuning in, the Sean Widmer Podcast. Last episode of the month of September in the year 2024. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to do a little housekeeping on the podcast before we get into today's meat and potato. Something happened here in Lexington. We're going to discuss it, kind of walk down memory lane with it as well. So we're going to do that. But before we do any of that, we start the podcast off the same way we do every time. Thank you to the Patreon members over at patreon.com/Sean Widmer Podcast. Thank you for supporting this podcast, throwing some dollars at it every month so that I can pay to keep it going, because I do have to pay to keep the podcast going. So thank you for that from the bottom of my heart. And also, we will do some discussion points about it and why you guys are extremely important to me, because we have, we just have some, well, we're going to do some numbers here in a second. I will say there was going to be a podcast for the Patreon members this weekend. Stay tuned. Again, the meat and potatoes, we weren't home. I didn't end up having access to my recording software this weekend. We'll get into why that is in just a second. Also, we kick the podcast off every episode with the 5-star reviews on iTunes. If you leave a 5-star review on iTunes, we read it to kick off the podcast. There was not a 5-star review on iTunes this time, which means I come up with a shout out. And my shout out today is going to go to my daughter Olivia's new real passion. She's always dabbled, but now we're in puzzles. Oh yeah, baby. Olivia's into puzzles and is good at them. That's the key. She's not just into them, she's really good at them. So she has kind of all the basic kid puzzles, starting from a 9-piece, the borders in the middle piece, then you extend it out 27, whatever. You keep on going up and up and up. Are they all divisible by 3? No, they're not, because 1,000 is not divisible by 3. Forget that I ever brought that up. Anyways, we have expanded out, and we're now doing some bigger puzzles that I think are in the 50-piece range, and she does them by herself. And it's super impressive. I love it. Well, we were at my mother-in-law's this weekend, and there was a Moana puzzle there she really wanted to do. And I opened it up, and I was like, oh, no. And it was 300 pieces. And I thought, well, she's just not going to be interested. She sat there. We did the whole border, and then she actually started piecing together a chunk that was Moana's dress. Or no, excuse me, it wasn't Moana. It was Encanto. Sorry, because that matters to you. But Mirabelle's dress, which is it's black with all these flashy, bright drawings on it. And so Olivia was working on that and actually making tons of progress. And I thought, we're going to do this. We're going to get this done. And then people came over and cousins came over and the puzzle was thrown off the table. And my daughter had a little bit of a moment where she came upstairs and was like, the puzzle is ruined. The puzzle is ruined. We'll never get it. And I was like, we're going to fix it. Then I went downstairs and saw where the puzzle pieces were. And I was like, oh yeah, no, the puzzle's ruined. We're never doing that puzzle ever again. There was pieces. I don't know what happened. There was pieces everywhere. And so I was like, yeah, you know what? That puzzle is dead. That puzzle, you are actually right. We will find a 300-piece Disney puzzle and do it at home. So shout out to my daughter's obsession with puzzles. I love puzzles. We're getting a puzzle season with fall on the horizon. Okay, let's do it today. Let's talk. Let's talk about things. We had a weird weekend here in Lexington. I don't want to do that first. I want to do state of the podcast. 2024 was the year I wanted to grow the podcast. That was my focus on growing the podcast. And I didn't know how to do that, right? This has forever just been the podcast. Since 2005, when I started doing this podcast, it's just been the thing. For most of the years, it was just my hobby outside of radio to talk just about way stuff that I wanted to talk about and do it for a very tiny, small group of friends. And then there was a moment in the early 2000s where it actually grew quite big, like way bigger than it is now. And I neglected it for maybe 2 or 3 years. Didn't do an episode for like 2 or 3 years. And then came back slowly. And now it's just kind of where it is. There's so many podcasts out. You can't really build traction like I could when I was kind of at this peak in the early 2010s. And so I kind of thought, I really like it. And it was kind of just a goal for me. Like this year, do I need the podcast to blow up? No, I'm going to keep doing it because I like doing it. But I told myself, look, let's try to put some effort into it and see what can happen. And boy, have I been disappointed. This is one of those people say, you can do anything you want. And I'm here to say, well, it's not always true, because you do have to be good at it. You have to be at another level of good at it to succeed at a lot of things where people say, okay, if you just try, if it's something you love, you can be successful at it. That is not always true, kids. I'm very passionate about this. I'm just not as good at it as a lot of other people are, but I'm going to keep doing it. But in terms of growth, like September, we stayed flatline. It was the first month in over a year where everything just flatlined, and there was no growth. In fact, listening went down a little bit. So what that means for me is that we need to come a team, people who do listen. What's working right now, right? If I want to try to make one last push the last couple months of the year, what's working? What's working on the podcast? Is it news topics? Is it personal life stuff? What is it? Is it a specific topic? Is it sports? Is it whatever? And so I need to focus on that. But at the same time, I kind of like this being my journal, and it's just what it is. And if it grows, it grows. And if it doesn't, I'm thankful for the people who like it for what it is and that community we've got as it is. And thanks for the Patreon people, this is able to continue because I'm able to pay to make it work. And so that's just where we're at. That's the honesty of where we're at with this podcast right now. Just a little bit of frustration, a little bit of bummed out that I thought maybe we could push to make it grow. I also don't really know how to make a podcast grow in 2024. I did listen for a while to a couple podcasts that explained it, and I tried some of the things they did, and a couple of them I don't love for what is happening here. One of the big things they tell you in podcast growth, for people who listen to this and want to do one, it's get really descriptive, get a real big niche target audience, right? So for me, something I love the NBA, and I love the Portland Trailblazers, or I love the Gonzaga Bulldogs. And what they would say is make a podcast that is specifically focused to a group: Gonzaga Bulldog basketball fans, Portland Trailblazer basketball fans. I don't think those are great examples because they're probably topics that have been oversaturated, but let's stay on those things. I guess we could say, let's say you like to cook nachos, you like to make nachos. So you make a podcast super focused on nachos, and then you target your niche group, and then you kind of expand off of that. Well, for me, I can't boil down this podcast to like, what is the niche target, because I want to use it as a journal. And so I don't know, and I haven't been able to dive into that. So that was one thing. Then the other was like, go to social media and do stuff on social media that might get it seen. And so this year I decided to do something that I've always been sort of against and I haven't been comfortable doing. And that was adopt TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and put together little 15 to 50-second clips that I bombard on social media that have to be annoying. And I throw them up there in hopes that maybe, they get out to other eyes and, make sure they know it's the podcast and they come listen to the podcast. That has not worked. People have seen the videos. The TikTok ones, more than any, will get, a couple of them got over 30,000 views. A couple of them got over 10,000 views. A bunch of them are in the thousands. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of eyes. But it did not turn into, as some of these podcast coaches said, it didn't turn into listeners. So that's kind of where we're at. That's just the state of the podcast. Now let's get out of that because I've got a lot to talk about here in the meat and potatoes. Thank you again, Patreon people. This is why every time I tell you you're very important, because as I tried to grow the audience and ran into the frustration of not doing it, the people who are there supporting it, you mean more and more to me every month. So thank you. Okay. Friday was wild here in Lexington. Wild. And I don't know 100%. Okay. So I'm sort of speculating here, but we got hit on Friday with insane rain. Insane in the membrane. That doesn't work. That's why this podcast fails. Okay, that's why. Great ones like that. Insane in the rain. That's what insane in the membrane, insane in the rain. That's where I should have gone. Still sucks. Okay, so it rained like crazy here Friday. And I think it was related to whatever the hurricanes are in the Carolinas and Florida. And the reason I say that is they hit us the same time everything hit there. So it was either just kind of a lucky thing that we got hit with something crazy while they got hit with something crazy, or it was tied together. It would make sense that it was tied together. So that's why I speculate that. And obviously nowhere near what you see on TV with a hurricane. Nowhere near it. But for me, coming from the Pacific Northwest, this was something I'd never experienced, where we had winds that were absolutely wild. Crazy winds with torrential rain. And it hit Kentucky, and the winds took out a bunch of trees, which of course took out a bunch of power lines, and a windstorm situation like we would have in Washington a couple times when I lived there. It knocked out power to hundreds of thousands of people. And we were one of those families that got hit with that. But that's not what I want to focus on yet, because I was at work this day, and as I was going to work, found out schools were canceled. And so, it's kind of that feeling. We got a message from someone at work like, hey, be careful when you're driving today. It's really windy. It's really rainy. Driving conditions are bad. Try not to drive station, or I always call them station vehicles. 20 years of saying that is hard to break. Company vehicles. Try not to drive them around. We're just trying to stay safe today. So I'm at work, and not a lot of people were at work because we had a lot of people out at an event, and it was wild because it started raining so hard, so much. Our building has a couple of big sliding doors, big garage doors, huge ones to back in big trucks. Water started getting under them, and we started having a little bit of flooding. And it was enough. The rain was coming in so hard, and it was so much more than I'd ever been around, even in Venezuela, where we had crazy torrential rain that would fill the streets with water, and we would go tubing in them. That's a real thing in Venezuela. I guess that was probably more rain than what we had, but it's been 30 years since I'd experienced that. And it started flooding into the building. So we went from, work mode. What are we going to do Friday? Let's get stuff done. There's a lot of big events coming up in Lexington next month with, for me in particular, working with Keeneland, which is a racetrack here, getting stuff ready for their big races in the fall and helping them out with stuff. We had to take a pause on that for just a second because we're shop vacuuming water, we're mopping water, we're trying to squeegee water so that it doesn't get to our nice equipment and flood the building. And so we're trying to fight against the rain. We're tarping off outside where there could be any rain getting into the building. And it went from a day of work to like a day of keeping the building dry, which was wild. It was weird. And it's this weird feeling like you bond really well with coworkers when there's something like this happening. Hang on just a second. So we're all, working together. It's not fun. I almost said it was really fun, but it's like this weird camaraderie, and we had a weird work day. We lost power at our building at one point, so we're running on a generator for the second half of the day. We get the email like, turn off anything you don't need to use. We're on generator, so we've got lights off in the building, and it was fun. One of the guys got pizza for everyone, and we all sat and we were all soaking wet because we were going outside trying to tarp off these areas so rain wouldn't get in. We're inside, squeegee and mopping. So there's just water, you're just kind of wet. And we all sat down and we just, for about an hour, sat there and just chit chatted while eating pizza. And it was this weird, great bonding day, but it was a weird day at work, And I was like, is this one of the weirdest days I've ever worked? Now, the power outage affected my life. We're going to get to that in Kelly's What Are You Into? It affected it greatly. But I don't know if it's going to make it in the top 3 weirdest work days. I don't know past that. I wrote down 3. Here right now are the 3 work days that were the weirdest in my life to work that would be the ones that would have to be knocked off by something. So let's start with number 3. Number 3 would have been in March 2020. Everyone knows now. The first day we broadcast the radio show live from our houses. I was at my house, Jay was at his house, Kevin was at his house, and we broadcast live. So we get the word COVID has hit, we've got a shutdown, and panic kind of sets in right across the board for everyone because we don't know what's going to happen, right? You go back to that time, and it was like, what's happening right now in society? What's happening with the economy? What's happening with businesses? Unfortunately, COVID hit a lot of businesses, and businesses weren't able to make it through. And you could kind of see that at the very start of it. And it was like, what are we going to do? And we have to do something to make this work. And for us, it was a radio show. And again, we're all in different places. This was not a planned event. And so it wasn't like we had been sent home with great plans to broadcast live from home. That was not how it worked. We just went home. And I'm going to pat myself in the back. I got us up and running immediately. And other shows and other radio stations were off for days before their morning show got back. But thanks to my nerdiness, streaming video games on Twitch and Justin TV, I had a good base for getting a broadcast using just the internet, which we all three of us had. And we were able to get through, I think, to Skype to start with. We settled on, I think, Discord later. I'm trying to remember how that worked. But we were able to get calls in, and I was able to push our calls back through the radio station, and we were able to do our show live. We actually did a couple days where we would record an 8-minute segment, then I would send it to a computer in the studio that would play up on our station delayed. So we would record from 5 to 6. We recorded 3 or 4 segments, and I would load them to the computer, and from 6 to 7:30, those segments would play. And it would sound like we were live, but we weren't. We had recorded all these, an hour early. Then from 6 to 7, we'd do the same thing. We'd record another hour and a half's worth of segments and throw them in live as they happened. And so we had the illusion of being live on the radio, but we were all recorded an hour earlier. So that lasted for a couple days until I kind of figured out how we could get on the air live. And it was kind of crazy because we went live, and because we had a pretty decent-sized Facebook page, we were promoting that we were live, and a lot of other radio stations were seeing this, and they were reaching out to me, how are you doing this? And I remember this weird feeling of like, I want to help you, but also like, it was weird. I ended up helping everyone who reached out to me. And there was one guy in particular he was a general manager for like a bunch of stations on the West Coast, a bunch. And he talked to me for 30 minutes, and I walked him through what we were doing. And I know he used it for all his stations. And to this day, I know he did not thank me. And it pisses me off still today because I got all of his stations on the air, and he never said thank you. And that drove me insane. But whatever. But I remember not wanting to tell people because I was like, look, we're live right now on the internet also. And this is a great opportunity for me to grow the Jay and Kevin show because we're all you've got right now in terms of live radio. But I helped. So anyways, that was a weird day to work. Was the first day live during COVID from my house in my sweatpants and my sweatshirt with my coffee at home, little tiny 3-month-old Olivia coming upstairs with Anna every now and then, like, how's everything going? That was a wildly weird day. That was number 3. Number 2, I probably should have I needed to look up the year. I forgot to do that. I think it's 2008. Let me make sure. I'm going to do a quick Google search. Spokane. How do you spell Spokane? Spokane. Let me type in 2008. It is, yes, Snowpocalypse 2008. December of 2008. I was working at the radio station. I was doing a sports show on 1510 KGA. And we got hit in Spokane with, let's see, I'm going to read the article here from the Spokesman Review. December 2008 was the snowiest December in Spokane's recorded history. It helped make that entire winter the snowiest on record in the area. Begin with a modest 2.7 inches on December 12th. The event, December's first snowfall after a mild start to the month. Okay, so that's where it started. Then, December 17th through 18th, nearly 2 feet of snow fell within a 2-hour period. For perspective, the amount that fell during those 2 days is roughly the same that falls during all of December and January during a typical year. It happened in one 24-hour period. It shut down the entire South Hill in Spokane, which is where our radio station was located, and you could not get there. I lived 7 blocks away from the radio station, me and one other guy. And we were the only people who could get to the radio station at all. And so there was 2 days that I worked. One of them was really fun. Well, not fun. One of them was interesting for me because Gonzaga had a basketball game that we didn't know if it was going to happen against Portland State. Portland State ended up upsetting Gonzaga in the game. And I remember discussing, because I don't remember if it was game day. I forget if I think the game was on a Thursday night. I think it was. But it was either the preview the night before or the day of the game, talking about, is the game going to happen? We got a call from the people, like a guy on one of the buses for Portland State who was like, we're here. And like we made it, and like we got to broadcast it on the air. It was crazy. So it was a wild day to work, but there was 2 of us in a building that normally housed 70 people, 70 to 100 people, maybe less than that. It was probably less than that. It was way less than that. It was probably 40 people, 40 to 50 people. And there was just two of us doing everything, running every radio station. It was crazy. And I remember like one of the bosses was like, look, if you guys can get up there and do this, I'll make sure you get food. We'll take care of you. I'll send sandwiches down from the Subway that was down the street, pizza from the pizza pipeline. If you can keep all our radio stations on the air until they open the South Hill back up, we'll take care of you. I remember they couldn't get the pizza delivered. And the guy who, I don't even remember the guy's name. I think it was Taylor, I think his name was. He and I are just in this building like, what are we going to do? Here to top off with this. Let me finish this. From December 19th to 31st, an onslaught of storm systems stretching hundreds of miles across Washington state blanketed communities from Seattle at Anacortes. I'm sure I said that wrong, to Spokane and Coeur d'Alene. Spokane saw only 3 days out of 12 without snowfall. That's crazy. On top of that, it was cold. Temperatures running between 15 and 5 degrees, which is what caused the chaos, because everything got wet and then froze, and then that's how trees break, and then you're screwed. Plus, the South Hill was an ice sheet. You couldn't drive up the South Hill. So that was a crazy day. 2 guys in a radio station. I guess that was multiple days. But just, I remember the power went off for a bit, and we were on generator or whatever it was, and it was 2 of us in a pitch black building trying to keep stations on the air because no one was there to do it. It was wild. So that's number 2. Ice Storm 2008. My number 1 weirdest day, though, I think it would be for a lot of people. Obviously, 9/11 was crazy. September 11th, 2001. I was working at Babbage's, which was GameStop. Babbage's, Northtown Mall. I woke up. Everything happened. Saw it on the news. Was terrified. Not terrified enough not to stop by Hastings on my way to work to open the store and pick up POD Satellite, which came out that day. That album came out that day. I remember driving to work and thinking, well, I'm going to go buy, I know this album comes out today. I'm going to go get it. I loved POD at the time for some reason. And I remember going by Hastings, being the only one in there. This guy was ticked off that I was even there. Bought the album, left. He was so mad I was in the store. And drove to Northtown, where I stood in Northtown. We were one of probably half of the stores in Northtown that were open. Most of them didn't. And being legitimately scared the entire day. We didn't stay open the whole day. I think we stayed open until about 1 o'clock. And then mall security came through and said, we're shutting down the building. But there was no one that came shopping. Nobody. So the mall was just mall employees. And we were all walking around. It was the day of days to walk in and just take everything from stores, because I opened the shop and then we were out in the hall talking to other people because we were all scared. And the rumor mill would happen so fast. It was like, well, Jimmy at KB Toys heard that Fairchild Air Force Base in Airway Heights is a target, and so they're coming for us. As everyone, we didn't know what was going on. We assumed that these could be major attacks across the U.S. And then they were like, how big is Northtown in terms of building size? And that became we suddenly knew what all the motives were. We're like, well, in terms of building size, we're blank building in Spokane. For size, would we be one? That was just a crazy day, right? So that one will never be. It was terrifying. Obviously a sad, sad day, but that was a weird day to work, and there will never be one weirder than that. Just roaming around the mall with mall employees from other stores, trying to get any info we could, what have you heard? What have you heard? And, it's 2001, so it's before smartphones or anything like that. So, we're getting word from people outside who are watching the news, and that was crazy. Okay, so there's the 3 weirdest days I've worked.
Kelly's, what are you into?
I understand that emergencies like there were on Friday at a minor scale here in Lexington are not great things I'm not trying to celebrate them. And a lot of emergencies that have to do with weather are terrible and affect people in a terrible way where they lose a lot. I want to make very clear, I'm not trying to make light of that. But I will tell you this, when it comes to something I really like, if there was something like a power outage that affected my family on Friday, and we had to make a decision of what are we going to do? We found out we weren't going to get our power back estimated until Tuesday. We ended up getting it Saturday evening, went out Friday, came back Saturday evening, so well before Tuesday. But we're like, what are we going to do? Well, we packed up and we went to my in-laws' house to stay for the foreseeable, at that time, foreseeable future until our power came back. Planning on maybe till Tuesday. And again, when it is because of something that has really affected you in a way that you're going to lose a lot, I understand not loving that. But when it's something like this, that we're going to get through it, the worst thing that's going to happen is the stuff in our refrigerator is going to go bad. But we're without power and we'd like to be somewhere with power. This happened at Ice Storm in the 90s in Spokane. I love packing up and going with other people to a house that has the amenities you've lost and staying in like this weird feeling of like, ooh, this is kind of wild. This is different. This is weird. There's mystery to it. When's it going to be done? I love it. Especially with family. I've done it once with friends. There was a big windstorm that happened in Spokane, like 2015, I think it was, that knocked power out for like weeks. And we did that again. We're with friends. We were all together. People didn't have power. We're over, and it was a big time. I love it. And so we were at my in-laws, and again, there's this mystery and intrigue. And my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, they were there with their kids. So it's kind of this, my daughter and the kids are playing, and the cousins are together, and I'm sitting out on the back patio with Jay. We're enjoying some bourbon, having a fun night. The girls are inside gossiping. Patrick comes out after he gets his kids down. We're watching some college football. And there's this weird feeling of like, this is not a normal night. This is not going to happen again in a long time. But it's really enjoyable right now to be in this. To the point where Saturday, when our power came back on, my sister-in-law was hyped. She was like, get me out of here. I want to go home. I was like, nope. I want to stay at Jay and Lisa's one more night because it's kind of fun. It's like that. I don't know if you have this in your life, but on Christmases, we'd go from one of my grandparents' houses to my dad's mom and dad's house to Grandpa and Grandma's house, my mom's mom and dad, and we'd spend the night there on Christmas Eve. Oh, what a time. And it always felt magical. And it always was fun. You're in someone else's house. We were grown up. We did it when we were kids, but when we were grown up, we did it too. And it's just different and it's fun and it's just, I love that. And you're with family and it's just enjoyable. So Jay and Lisa, thank you for putting up with us for one night. You got to know, I was cheering for multiple. I was cheering for Sunday night and Monday night. I was going to bother you guys for the long run. Okay, there's your favorite 15-minute podcast. Oh, I need to do comments real quick. Let's do comments. Ian said this in terms of sleeping kids. We give Emma and Logan melatonin. Doc told us no more than 5 milligrams. This was before we got their ADHD diagnosis and we're able to work around the bedtime issue there. Kelly's, what are you into? For Ian, Guardians of the Galaxy on PlayStation. Pretty fun story, is entertaining. Cheers. Okay, Ian, when that game came out years ago, I heard good things. Never played it. I need to play it. Is it on PS Plus? Can I get it on PS Plus? All right, Tall Texan, a.k.a. Carol. All right, she's Bat Defender. I'm Bat Enemy right now. I'm not looking forward to paying a lot of money to get bats out of my house. Carol said this. Love your podcast, Sean, but bats are protected species in Kentucky, and it's illegal to kill them. Try contacting the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. They may have some less costlier ways of rehoming them. Save the bats, as farmers need them to pollinate fruits, vegetables, etc. Like pollinating bees, they are gradually becoming fewer in number. Try contacting your local wildlife center in Lex, and they may be able to help you as well. Our local bat rehab center brings bats to schools to educate children regarding the positive things that bats do. For instance, one bat can consume over 5,000 mosquitoes in one night. Hey, mosquitoes, like the #1 killer in the world. Isn't that right? Take a little time to research these unusual creatures and share with your kiddos, and hopefully their fear will subside. Carol, the best I got for you is Batman. That's where my research goes. But I will say this, we're not killing the bats. The guys who do this, they're not bat killers, they're bat removers. So what they do is they get the bats out and they clear them out, get them out however they came in, and then they, after all the bats are gone, they inspect to get all the bats out. They seal all the areas the bats were getting in, and now the bats are out. So they don't rehome them, but we're not killing them. So I hope you're okay with us being in the middle here. Hope you're okay with us being in the middle. Finally, we've got this. Oh, no, was that it? Was that it? I think that was it. Let's see if there's one more comment. No, that was it. That was it for comments. for just under 15 minutes. Thank you for tuning in. If you would like to make a comment, I would love it. Please go to seanslife.com. You can comment on Spotify if you listen there, or if you watch on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.